Hey everyone, welcome to section 3.3, Macroeconomic Objectives. Today we'll be looking at economic growth. So firstly, a definition, and this is a nice simple one. Economic growth is an increase in real GDP. However, there's also an alternative definition out there where we see economic growth as an increase in potential GDP. This distinction between actual output and potential output is an important one for us to note, and we'll see the difference between them when we draw our diagrams. Okay, so actual output. Actual output is the current level of real GDP in the economy. This can be any point within or on the PPC. Of course, actual growth is an increase in this output to any point further out. So it's going to look like this. This is going to lead to an increase in productive efficiency and a decrease in unemployment, generally. On the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, actual output is represented by the short-run equilibrium between SRAS and AD. Actual growth can be represented by either an increase in aggregate demand, looking like that, or an increase in short-run aggregate supply, which looks like this. Okay, we've seen potential output previously. Potential output is represented by the production possibilities curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve. Shifts in the factors, mainly quantity of resources and quality of resources, can increase the potential output. So it's going to look like this on the PPC, and on the ADIS diagram, it's going to look like this. So something to remember here is that when we shift LRAS, SRAS will shift also, as there will be a decrease in the cost of production. Now, we will quickly look at how to measure economic growth. There's a little bit of maths here, but again, far simpler than anything that you do in maths class. The equation is simple. Economic growth is real GDP in the current period minus the real GDP in the previous period. So usually we would measure that from one year to the next. And then we divide that by the real GDP in the previous period, multiplied by 100 to turn it into a percentage. So it's just the same as what we did when we were calculating percentage changes previously with elasticities. So here we have real GDP figures for Burmistan in 2013 and 2014. All we have to do is plug in the numbers, show our working, and remember to include the percentage sign, as without it, you won't get the marks. They're a little bit picky on things like that. You've got to use your units well. Okay, so there we are. We're just putting the figures into the equation. So often with these calculation questions, you just got to show your working. So just do one step, show you that you've got that, and then give the answer, making sure you put your units or percentage signs in there. All right, next we'll look at the impacts of economic growth. So why do we care about growth? So economic growth is going to lead to increased incomes. So that means that we should be able to get more of our needs and wants satisfied. More growth equals more income to satisfy our needs and wants. It should also lead to a little less poverty. However, the extent to which growth is beneficial to our living standards depends on a number of factors. For instance, how equally is this increase in income distributed? We saw during the pandemic recovery that a large part of the income increases went to the billionaire class. So here's a sample headline from that. The greater the share of income going to poorer households, the greater the increase in living standards will be. This is because poorer households, they're the ones with the greatest deprivations. If it all goes to the billionaires, can we really say that living standards have improved? Very much related to this is how much of the growth in income goes to women. Now, this is much more of an issue in developing countries, but it's still an issue in countries like Australia. But in developing countries, the economic power of women is much less. We're going to look a lot more closely at the role of women later in the course. Now, we can see in the chart here that growth can lead to increases in tax revenue for the government. You can see what has happened to tax revenues in Australia between 2008 and 2016. During that period, we had continuous economic growth, And we can see what happened to our income taxes. It just kept on going up and up. The more that governments spend on merit goods, such as education, healthcare, and infrastructure, the greater the positive effect is likely to be on living standards. So we can have growth, but to the extent that our living standards are improved, it may depend on how much the government is putting towards these important things like health, education, and infrastructure. Now, the more goods and services we are producing, the more people should be needed to produce them, meaning less unemployment. However, it's not always that simple. It used to be a long time ago, but technology is changing things. The advent of labour-saving technologies can mean that more is produced without actually needing more people to produce it. So think of something like self-driving cars, for example. They're going to produce a lot of income for the owners of the self-driving cars. So transporting goods around, transporting people around, like Uber. So they'll create a lot of income, but how many people will actually be employed with the use of this technology? Another impact is that our affluence, so our increased incomes, can lead to new types of stress. We have so many choices now due to our growth that fear of missing out, or FOMO, is now a thing. So some question how much better off we actually are with the opportunities that our growth has led to. Does it just lead to greater anxiety in us, for example? Onto the environment. Growth can actually lead to higher environmental standards as we get richer. So the way I think about this is that we can afford to care more because we're richer. This can be shown in Australia by Woolworths recently succumbing to public pressure to no longer sell single-use plastic straws. And more recently in Australia and around the world, some governments have banned their sale. So that's a positive for the environment. However, there's also the environmental degradation if we do not have sustainable policies in place. We could see things like overfishing leading to extinction and mining leading to the loss of arable land, so land that we can grow crops on, grow our food on. It's clear to see how growth in the short term can prevent growth in the long term. So we need those sustainable policies. So it's the type of economic growth that will decide whether the environment is better off or worse off. There's also some social costs. Inequality is an issue that we're going to tackle in much greater depth quite soon. Economic growth does not necessarily mean growth for all. It can lead to wide disparities in income within a society. This inequality can lead to increased tensions and a loss of social cohesion. Another social cost is obesity. With more and more resources at our disposal, there are many opportunities for excess. If our richest societies are also our most obese, then are our richer societies really richer? Okay, that's all for this section. So make sure you've got a clear understanding of the concepts we've gone through, and we will work through some questions in class. See ya.